All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Depends on where you're coming in from. Welcome to another Wiser webinar. We are having a fun topic today. We're talking about reality. What is it? What's fake? What's privacy? It's going to be basically it's taking the internet entirely to pieces just to see what actually we can trust out there, if anything, and what we can't trust. So I've got an esteemed panel with me today, and the Wolfmutt's here as well this morning. And so I'm going to shut up for a second, and I will let everybody introduce themselves for a minute or so. And ladies first, please. Arti, you're up.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. I'm Arti Raman. I am the founder and CEO of Titanium. We are a data protection company. We work to keep personal data safe while making it usable. So very interested in the topic at hand and how it relates to privacy, personal data, personal rights, and things like that. So thanks for having me, Chris.
Totally welcome. Justin, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Justin Daniels. I am a cybersecurity and business attorney at the law firm Baker Donaldson. So I help companies put good cyber hygiene into practice, but I also handle the breach on the other end. So happy to be with you today.
Jeff, sir, you're up.
Hey, welcome everyone. Happy to be here. Jeff Mann, senior consultant at a company called Online Business Systems, qualified security assessor within the PCI world. I'm also a podcaster hosting Security and Compliance Weekly on the Security Weekly Network. Curmudgeon by day, by trade, by frame of mind. Been in the InfoSec industry almost 40 years. Hacker, OG, elder statesman. Chris and I like to drink whiskey.
That works. Man, I'm looking forward to the time that we can. Oh, that's awesome. That's brilliant. I'm looking forward to the time we can actually get everybody back together again safely. So we'll see how that goes.
Amen.
Yeah. Gabrielle, sir, you're up.
Yeah, founder of Wiser. We do security awareness training, and you've probably seen me on LinkedIn. So this is the type of things we do for the community, you know, getting people to talk about interesting topics such as deepfake in this case.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining. Standard normal disclaimer to everybody that's listening in. Please feel free to chuck questions up. I'll keep an eye on them. If we can, we'll add them in. Or we'll just say hi in there and we'll do the same thing back. So let's hit this one. We talk about deep fakes, we talk about cloning, we talk about bots, we talk about all of this kind of stuff. And to me, it comes down to a couple of different things. One, it comes down to data and the availability of that data and how do we make decisions on it. And then secondly, it comes down to the simple fact we've put so much of ourselves out there already that the next logical step was that somebody would just basically take all that data and use it for their own purposes and potentially also against us. So let's start with a fun question, the fairly easy one. Is the fact I can grab an app on my phone, download it and change my voice, is that fun? Should it be okay? Should we manage it? Or is it just a bit of harmless fun and we're reading too much into it? I'm going to throw that one out for anybody to pick this one up for a second and kind of go from there.
Let me start with a quick comment. No question that it is fun, but also no question that the implications are tremendous and far-reaching, and sometimes you can't unring these bells. So we are seeing already that we are creating more data every day than we did, 5-6 years ago on a yearly basis. And so I think it's only a matter of time before the consequences catch up. And so fun as it is, I think there's lots of implications, and I think the rest of this hour will probably go through some of those.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I
Jeff,
think it's,
Justin, Gabrielle?
No, go ahead, Justin. Feel free.
I guess my answer to the question will be, how did you feel about social media in 2007 versus how do you feel about social media today? Because we can talk about deepfake. I deal with security and drones, and so what have we learned from things such as social media, which we can have people say, wow, it's helped me in great ways. It's also had some pretty significant adverse consequences. So I guess what I'm saying is, what are we learning from those experiences that we can apply to deepfake, particularly in the context of what you're going to hear over the next hour? I think the answer is, one, this technology is here to stay. I don't know that we're getting rid of it. But what are we going to do as a society to really think about how social media, deepfake, is impacting us, and what kind of guardrails or potential, in my view, national privacy legislation is required to really start to grapple with all of these technologies in a socially and meaningful way?
Yep.
That's interesting because I mean you're right. Social media in the early mid 2000s was like woohoo, great, and there were so many people that went charging. Still, so many people that go charging off down there without thinking of the consequences. And we're running into this. Go for it, Jeff.
It's my turn to hopefully say something profound, but
Yeah.
if maybe I will, maybe I won't. Your original question reminded me of when I was probably in junior high school. In the youth room of the church where I grew up, they made the mistake of letting the youth decorate, and somebody painted this statement on one wall that I've always remembered to this day. It's illegal, immoral, unethical, and socially irresponsible, ... but it's fun. Why that was in a church room, youth room, I don't know, but I thought of it when you asked that question.
Yeah.
My second thought is you can install an app on your phone that does what? Jib-Jab's been around for how long? I think that's probably my first foray into what we now call deep fakes. And yeah, it was fun. Put your face on a dancing whatever and send it as a birthday card or a holiday greeting card. I agree with Justin. I think because of the fun factor, the technology is here to stay. And like so many facets of digital technology in what we just simply used to call the internet, we are fast trying to catch up with all the technological advances. Technology long ago lapped us in terms of, the old saying, necessity is the mother of invention. I like to ask people, if it's not necessary, is it really innovative? Food for thought.
Yeah, interesting one on that one. Gabrielle, any thoughts to add on to that?
Yeah, I think, not only specifically for deepfake, but in general, it used to take about 10, 15 years. If you think about the phone, the TV, there was a gap between new technology, between the time it introduced and how long for society it took to adapt to that technology. Like I said, phone, TV, internet, but it's shortening to a point where like almost every year we're getting hit with something brand new, and we as society need to adapt to it. I honestly believe that this can create a collapse of society if we don't learn how to adapt fast enough to the technology, because we can see that the deepfake is part of misinformation in general, and we're not giving enough time, I think, in general, to process what's happening, to adapt, to create regulations, and all of that can really create, I think, in the future, if we continuously, evolve that fast, to almost a collapse of society to some degree.
So Chris, I'm going to usurp your role for a moment. I'm going to ask our panelists this question for our viewers to think about. Is some of this digital technology like deepfake basically the cigarettes of the 21st century that needs to be regulated that way? Because we have seen with social media the consequences of how hard it is to adapt and the consequences of technology. So do you have to take a position from a public policy perspective of, to Gabriel's point, if we don't get a handle on this, we're going to have a breakdown in society? I personally believe you can have a direct correlation between what happened on January 6th in Washington, D.C. with all of the stuff that's gone on social media for the last 10 years. And so now we get into deepfake, which in my view is a weaponized form of social media. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you think that this is kind of the cigarettes of the 21st century? And your business people are like, oh, do I want more regulation? But as an individual, maybe we really need it?
That is an interesting. No, that's a hell of an interesting point. That there's two camps I'm sitting in. Camp number one is horses bolted. I mean, it's gone. It's over the freaking. It's glue farm. We are, to Jeff's point, it's lapped us numerous times at this point. But there's the other side of me, which is if we don't do something soon, I mean, there's a part of me that's like, it was too freaking late. But there's another part of me going that we almost need to do something. That's to Artie's point about the amount of data we're creating. I think the stats are at the moment, it's like in the last 2 years, we've created like 95 to 97% of the data that we've ever created. I mean, it's ridiculous how much stuff. So that apparently isn't going away anytime soon. So there is a point to say, okay, how much of me do I actually own? Now the challenge is, do we have to go back and educate me? And back to the wiser logic on this one is, how much do we have to educate me about how much I own of myself, where I put myself, how I put myself, how I project myself? And then the problem is with legislation, your only challenge on the legislation side is, number one, to your point, you've made the word federal a number of times. I'm totally with you. I'm fed up to the back teeth of seeing all these bloody state privacy laws. I'm like, for God's sakes, in theory, you're one sovereign country. Get your shit together and do one federal law. But on secondly, that's great inside our borders. The internet knows almost no boundaries. It does know some boundaries, but the internet knows almost no boundaries. And so putting a US law in place protects maybe 4% of the population, 4 to 6% of the global population. Yeah, I've got 7.3 billion other people out there that aren't protected by it. And how do we deal with that? Because we have to deal with that.
In a world of decentralized, now we're going to decentralization. It's like so many things are happening. We want to decentralize everything. It doesn't go really well with regulations and yeah.
Well, there's also, right, regulations are as good as enforceability. I think one of the bigger questions facing us is also, what exactly would you regulate? How can you enforce it? And how can you even manage the infrastructure? Guys, we've got all this information infrastructure that speaks to misinformation, but also manipulation, right? You can manipulate the social consciousness a little bit. You can influence so many things. So on the enforcement side, I think is sort of the other half. How would you do that? And that's something that would actually love to have some thoughts as well.
So,
well, let me throw in my thoughts to Justin's question. Short answer is yes. I think we all intuitively feel like we need to do something. Where I'm challenged is and I'm going to ultimately flip this as a question back to you. I'm challenged in okay, we want to do something. Where do we start? We want to protect data, but just thinking about what we consider to be data, and the question I want to ask is, what is data and what is the law called data, and does the legal definition of data need to change? But think about this. When I was a kid, everybody had a book in their house that had a list of everybody in the county or the state, their name, address, and phone number. Nowadays, young people, people I hang out with on social media, they consider their address to be privacy information. They protect that. Not everybody, but a lot of people do. Whereas I'm just kind of like, I don't care. I don't care if you know where I live. The idea of what is considered privacy information, I think, has evolved, and I don't think we've necessarily accounted for all the ways that this thing keeps track of us, that isn't the traditional name, address, phone number, social security number, bank account number, credit card numbers, all that kind of stuff. Our motions, our physical location, our tendencies, what things we look at, what things we search for, what we frickin' talk about when this thing's within earshot. all this needs to, in my opinion, needs to be somehow addressed and redefined, if it hasn't already, as data, and then classify it as privacy information or not. And then what do we do to regulate it and protect it?
Well, quick point on that, if you don't mind, Chris. Sorry to jump in. You know, the point you made about our addresses, it didn't matter that we were in the yellow pages before and now it matters. I think the difference is that we now have access to information systems based on our identity, and our identity is verified by a number of factors. And so when you get those 20 questions to say, hey, who are you, verify who you are, some of that data now unlocks things that it didn't unlock 20 years ago. And so the nature of what we do with that information has changed. And I think hence, right, it makes sense that now we care that we aren't in the yellow pages and you can't identify us, because those are the things that we use to verify online identity as well. So I wanted to sort of throw that in there. Go ahead, Chris.
Let me caveat that a little bit. I'd say it did unlock it previously, but you had to use it differently.
Yes.
To Jeff's point, if I wanted to attack somebody in Colorado, the chances are I had to get a yellow pages from somebody in Colorado, which means I had to bloody well come here. Nowadays, I can be halfway around the planet, and I can use that data differently. Again, years ago, if I wanted to do it, I'd have to flip through, find you in the yellow pages, make a phone call, pick up the phone and dial every bloody number individually to do it. It was a pain in the ass. Some of us did it. Nowadays, I don't have to do that. I can take the one piece of information, pair it with a couple of others, and send it everywhere at once.
Yeah.
Here's what would be interesting. I think I like the idea where Justin's going, but I think we almost have to separate it into two arguments. Argument number one is there's stuff that we're just not going to be able to tackle. Let's be perfectly honest. We have challenges at the moment. I think there's stuff we can't tackle. What I think we can tackle is stuff inside our own village. It's stuff where, let's say, perfect example, my daughter has no problem about the simple fact that she gets adverts from like American Eagles and Ariel and all the other people going, hey, we got stuff on sale and here's what it is, and this is your kind of sizes because we know you bought in the past. Therefore, here's some stuff that's of interest to you. She does have a problem if she goes shopping and does some things and then gets an advert from, say, Weight Watchers that goes, hey, we see you've gone from a size 4 to a size 6 or a size 8, and let's have a conversation about your health. Or let's have a conversation about weight loss. And you're like, pan. So I think how some of the companies that we interact with use that data, regulate that data, and manage that data, I think that's definitely where I think we should have a better focus. And again, if I'm using stuff in Kroger's and all of a sudden my healthcare cost goes up, the hell's name's going on here? You know, what are you guys talking about behind the scenes, and why am I not part of this? So I think there's definitely some tie-ins that I think, you know, to Justin's point, that we can go hammer people on. But I got a feeling that some of it is going to be a hell of a lot harder to deal with. Thoughts on that from anybody? Justin, thoughts on that from you?
I mean, I guess when I listen to the panelists, I could wipe out Facebook and Google's business model if I eliminate Section 230 of the Telecom Act, which was written in 1996, before either of those businesses really got started. So while I appreciate that we probably need a global law on data privacy, and you're dealing with different cultures, if you've ever been to Europe, they view privacy so different than the United States because of their experience in World War II, very different than our experience in World War II. Yep. But having said that, I think of when we had the Great Depression in the US, and in the aftermath of that, we passed the Securities Act of 33, the Security Act of 34. They never contemplated derivatives, but it said, hey, you can't sell a security fraudulently, and the courts had to put, you know, a framework around that. But when we talk today, everyone remember George Carlin and the 7 dirty words you can't say on television? He was an amazing comic. That was because the FCC regulated television stations. Why can't the FCC regulate what goes on with social media? Because it's just another form of communication. To me, there are ways to think differently about frameworks we already have to start to put some guardrails around, because DeepFake is yet another expression of technology that potentially you could say the FCC could regulate, because this is a form of communication. And I'm not saying that's the simple and easy answer. All I'm suggesting is there are things that we've done throughout our history to deal with other technological revolutions like the car that we could bring to bear here. So I guess I'm of the opinion from my Justin the consumer and parent hat, I think there are things that we can do today to start to put guardrails around this, because I take Gabriel's comments seriously. I'm very concerned about the fabric of our society when you now inject deepfake into social media on top of all this other technology.
Yep.
Yeah, the ability to incite violence has just become way simpler. Oh, we've seen it. Let's be perfectly honest. To your point,
Well,
we've seen.
and I agree with Justin, and you know, the curmudgeon in me is not hopeful that we figure this out. You know, it's April 2021. We just passed the 30th anniversary of the Rodney King video, which was, you know, an interesting juxtaposition for recently settled court cases in the last week or two that involved cell phone video. But, you know, we've gone from a time when, wow, we've got the video evidence, and so clearly there's a crime committed, clearly there's been an abuse, and yet people were acquitted, to most recently, because of video evidence and really, you know, phone video evidence, and for no other reason, probably there was a conviction. You know, that's in the span of 30 years, and sprinkle January 6th in there at the tail end of it. You know, when you asked me to participate in this, Chris, you know, you started talking about, you know, reality and how do we know what's real. You know, we've gone from, wow, there's video evidence, it's real, it really happened, to we can't trust the video evidence. And what Artie was saying is very interesting in terms of what we consider to be personal information and how we have used personal information as an authentication form factor for so many years. Maybe part of the problem is we need to separate that out and think about how do we do authentication better, you know, independently of what do we do with data.
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that, you know, I say in other contexts is I only have 10 fingers. At some point I'm going to run out. So you know, it makes me uncomfortable that I'm using fingerprints to authenticate myself. Those are going into some database, someone's getting hacked, and now, you know, my identity is out there. To your point, it's very concerning, even just on that front. Voices, fingerprints, retina scans, you know, other stuff that's deeply personal as well. That then becomes fodder for deepfakes. Go ahead.
Well, but I guess at a more abstract level, what we're talking about, and this is one particular instance, is so there's all this data out there. What can somebody do with it? What can somebody do with it nefariously, if not illegally, you know, unethically? And what do we do about that? And how do we put some boundaries around that? I lean to the lawyer to maybe respond.
You know, like you see today that, go ahead, sorry, Justin.
No, Gabriel, you go ahead. I've talked a lot, please.
So, you know, we came from this age of information to the age of misinformation, and today it's more about curation. You can see that there's so much information, and we heavily rely on curation. And why is it? Because we want to trust someone. It's like so hard with all that information. That's why curation is like rising so much in terms of, you know, public interest. People like want all of those curations. And I think it has to do with trust, and we can't use our eyes anymore, you know, to decide what to trust, or, you know, or to read. Like, we have to develop that, you know, that truth sense, let's call it. And it has to be something we educate at an early age, because we just can't trust what we see anymore. It's not a good tool for us to make a judgment on what's real and what's not.
So okay, take a slightly different tact on this one. I'm actually intrigued to see, you know, there's been a number of, who was it? Was it Google, or was it Elon again, that's bringing back your dead relatives so you can have a conversation with them? Who was it that decided to do that? I'm trying to remember who that was. It was last 6 months, last year or so. Somebody was like, hey, we're gonna go through our entire, probably Facebook, no, not bloody luck. We're gonna go through everybody's data that you have on your, the person that unfortunately maybe has passed away, and now you can have a conversation with them again. And I'm like,
Oh, Microsoft. Yeah. Microsoft did a patent on it to bring dead people, to talk.
Was it Microsoft? Yeah. I mean, there's an intrigue on that one to see. I mean, I gotta be honest, there would be a huge part of me that wouldn't be, I'd be up for having a conversation with some interesting dead people. Now, the problem is, we're not having that conversation with that person. We're having a conversation with a computer generated based off of the information it thinks it knows versus what it knows, the whole lot. And I think we need to separate out maybe the fun side of this. Because there are, to a couple of our points, there is some fun stuff to this. We've got to separate that out with what's being used for, abuse, shall we say. What's being taken. We all know, unfortunately, about the revenge adult material side of it. We all unfortunately see, we have to deal with this on a regular basis, how that's used against people. Typically, yeah. So that side of it is definitely one area that we really need to take a look at and go through this. Basically, this Bruce, somebody just said it very well. Vicky just said it, Bruce versus invent. There's some elements that kind of intriguing to me, but there's definitely a bunch of them like, whoa, we've stepped over a line. Now, to Justin's point, can we put that line in the ground? Is it too late for that? How do we enforce it? How do we deal with it? How do we manage it? To Artie's point, how do we deal with the data itself? So I don't know.
You can have teachers now, virtual teachers, come up as Albert Einstein and teach your kids. So, why do we need teachers potentially? We can just bring somebody from the dead, have an AI that will, review everything that person wrote ever with the life, face and just teach. And this is freaking crazy, in my opinion, but it's
I mean, honestly, if you're in front of a whole bunch of students, what's more engaging, I guess, especially in today's age, we're all still remote for the most part. Kids are back and forth. If you have to engage with somebody, bring Einstein in for a day to give, it's like Peabody, it's like the Peabody kind of cartoon stuff. Bring Einstein in for a day to give a lecture. I mean, good grief, bring Galileo back. All of these are amazing tools to help foster and spirit education and all these things. But where do we draw the line?
How back do you go, by the way? Just think about who you can talk to when you think about it. Just think about the Bible. You can really go back and talk
I don't give a flying fudge bar about that blasted thing. I hate to say it. Sorry, some of us have no further belief in that than we do in a lot of other things. Let's go back to caveman times. So, y'all, 200,000 years ago, where the hell did we all come from? Oh, we all came from the same place. Maybe that might help us actually all realize that we're all actually one species for a change.
But what, to give it a good spin on the positive side for a second, you can use DeepFake for anonymizing, actually. If you think about it, instead of having that person, talk in an interview and it's blurred, now you can just slap another face on that person, and now you can anonymize, the person talking on TV, or the people, when you're filming a video in a, in a movie and you have all those people around, you can start using DeepFake to just anonymize, whoever you want, and still keep the facial, so there's also a good part from a privacy point of view, if you want to think about it, just to flip it,
That's an excellent point. That's a really good point. I was thinking that we can break the problem down, right? So the creation of the data, what data gets injected into these databases that can further get utilized, we can try to manage and regulate that. So put some controls around, hey, what do you get to use for what? And like Jeff was saying, if you separate the authentication out, you sort of save some of that involuntary submission of data into the process. Then you can regulate the processing of it. What are you allowed to use it for? And maybe, by breaking that down, we can wrap our arms around it. I'm sure Justin would know more about the technicalities of that. And then finally, the purpose, maybe, right? So what impact it has. So maybe by separating some of that, we can also bring some education. So, if you have a choice of how you want to be authenticated or, what your data is used for, we can give that control back to the subject And then for everything else, we can maybe have some utilization type regulation. What do you think, Justin, of the different ways or different aspects that can be regulated?
I think the biggest challenge we would have, like the debate we're having, is what really makes data valuable is the ability to run a process over the data to extract, be it marketing insights on how best to market to Gabriel, to extract business conclusions about how Artie can better grow her business. And so the data point in and of itself is not what's relevant. It's what you get mounds of data and you can start to put a process to your point on it. So the question becomes, how do we decide what processes we're going to permit, what they can be used for? Because what makes Facebook so valuable? Their ability to go through all of that data and help advertisers finely tune their targeting. And so the question becomes, how do we put some legal guardrails around that such that you have principles? Like, you can't fraudulently sell a security. Okay, what does fraudulently mean? Well, in different contexts, it can mean different things, because with technology evolving, that can mean something different for social media versus DeepFake versus a drone. So maybe what we have to do is come up with principles that we then, through courts, have to apply on a federal level, not the states, to particular circumstances, and put some real teeth in it so that companies will feel real financial pain if they violate it. Otherwise, you're going to have an issue over enforceability, because companies that are responding to the marketplace, they have very different motivations than what we're thinking as citizens and need protection. And who's supposed to do that? Right or wrong, it's the government.
Yeah. I also think that technology sometimes can save us from problems that technology creates. So in other words, right, we now have technology.
That's the problem. It's only sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, true. But to the extent, and where I was going with that was, when you have privacy preserving techniques to mine data, that's an example, right, of technology that you can put in place where aggregators and targeters and people that derive insights from data can get that without having exposure to the individual data points. And you don't have to rely on the provider to say, hey, you will in fact preserve the individual's information, because you're putting some technology in place that makes sure that it's not possible for them. So just throwing out some ideas, like perhaps it's time to innovate a little bit and support the regulation of the data as well. Other people's thoughts on the use of tech to prevent tech abuse be interesting.
I think the future probably is truth technology. Maybe there is a category, to be developed. Truth technology, everything that has to do with identifying false information, which I think is far-fetched. But maybe we'll see a category, because it's much needed to distinguish, something at least that will help us understand what's the probability of that piece of information to be true or not.
Yeah.
I just wonder if anybody will pay for that, because everybody thinks they know the truth anyway. So that's a
well, and then convenience. Don't forget how we are driven by convenience. It all sounds good unless we have to work harder to do whatever it is that we want to do.
It's that, and to Vicky's point, Vicky just made a really, really good point. From the criminal element, they're not going to care about regulations and procedures or principles. We see that already today. We have data privacy in place in certain places. It's all over Europe, exactly to Justin's point. They have a very, very different view and outlook on this. And yet at the moment, there's such a backlog of GDPR forfeitures, fines, and everything else. So they just can't even keep up with the damn stuff. So having the regulation is one great thing. Marvelous, splendid, great. Let's go fine everybody who screws up. But if your system to actually enforce that isn't going to keep up with the problem, then we have number one. Number two, what's the right way of saying it? The rules only keep good people good, or something like that. There's an official proper way of saying it. I can't remember exactly what it is. So that accounts for some of us, but the rest of us who decide we're going to bend and break the rules, who cares? It needs to be more than just I think, Justin, that needs to be in place, but we need the technology to protect us from technology in some ways, which is a little bit of a scary concept at this point.
But it's always been that way, Chris.
Yeah.
True. No, that's a good point. Yeah,
Since
that's
the
a good
dawn of the internet, some 30 some
Yeah,
odd
no,
years
that's a
ago.
really good point.
It's funny. I did a little bit of research, more on the philosophical side of things, and I'm sure all of us have heard the phrase "seeing is believing." So I Googled it, and if you can trust the Google results, which is a whole other layer to the discussion, it turns out it's from like I should bring up the page. From a 17th century English clergyman. And would you be surprised to know that we're not quoting the full quote? The full quote is, "Seeing is believing, but feeling is the truth." And the subcontext is, you can tell me that the fire is hot, but I'd believe it a lot more if it burned me. And ironically, that's really an early form of two-factor authentication. We're asking for confirmation based on two senses rather than one sense. And if you boil this down to, and I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but if you boil it down to, a scientific approach, we have five senses. How many of the five senses can we trust, or how many of the five do we need to invoke before we can reasonably trust that what we're presented with is real, and either for an authentication purpose, or do we want to believe something that we're reading or seeing? How do you translate that into the technology world? Maybe AI solves everything.
I mean, this is where I love Ryan and Evan, and Ryan's got amazing. I love the way he puts it. We're analog humans operating in a digital world.
Oh, yes.
And it's, I mean, and I know he grabbed it from somewhere, but I'm gonna keep referencing him on it because it's perfectly true. To your point, as kids, we were told, don't touch the stove and don't touch the kettle, the damn thing's hot. What did we flip and do? We went and touched the bloody thing. So we had
But that's because we're hackers. Does everybody touch the stove? I don't know.
I think everybody does, or at least I just want to put that hope out there that everybody does. We want that tactile feedback, yet in the digital world at the moment, we really don't get it. The consequences of us putting ourselves out there, we kind of feel, but we really don't feel yet.
So is part of the, I'm intrigued by this analog to digital analogy, is part of the problem, and I'm asking in the form of a question, and I'm asking myself, is it possible to invoke more than one of our five senses using technology?
Yes, I would argue it. I mean, we're at that point where we can do that. Whether we want to do that's a different conversation.
What's the second?
But Jeff, I love what you said with feeling. I think, because we're deceived by our senses, right? With sight, with, all the senses where technology is using to deceive us. But feeling, usually if we have to ask, is this a scam? Then the answer is yes. Many times, the things we teach, if it's too good to be true, it probably is, stuff like that. I think that's something we need to use more and less our senses, because in this digital world, our senses are deceiving us to some degree.
Well, you'll see, even in the authentication context, you'll see over the last few years, financial institutions will reverse authenticate. I mean, I know there's another term for it, right? So it's not just you putting your credentials into the login page. They'll give you something back that'll verify to you that they are in fact the bank that you're giving. So this idea of having the confirmation go the other way, sort of like what Jeff was saying, of course, in a really basic sort of way, we're seeing some of that, right? Because we know there's fake sites and there's scams, etc. So a little bit of that is coming into play.
Well, in the military, we used to call that challenge and response.
Yeah.
It was a two-way handshake, presenting some sort of, I know something and you know it, and I'm saying the right thing, and it was in two directions. Chris might have done that maybe in his younger days.
In the middle of the bloody night, in the middle of a mountain range. That always gets to be interesting.
Before we started, we were also talking about, from a legal point of view, and Justin, I would love for you to say what you said, before we started, but the question was also, do we own our own face even? So, like, if somebody's using my face, can I claim it's mine? What if they look like me? Where does it end? Where does the similarity cross the line where now it's not me? Because I can act, and I gave that example with a very big TikToker, Charlie D'Amelio, and she has over 100 million followers. And there was another TikToker, a small one. She was doing DeepFake, and she was basically not even saying she's Charlie, but when you see it, everybody recognizes Charlie. So she looks identical, and she was promoting her own brand without saying I'm Charlie. So like, what's identity even? Do we actually own our own voice, our own face? Can we claim, can we patent our own face?
Yeah, I think a more basic question, we're going to pile on Justin and he's going to fix everything and solve everything for us. Is this more of a civil or a criminal issue? Because take the example that Gabriel was talking about. You've got two, who's the good guy, who's the bad guy? You've got the one person that puts out videos. You've got somebody that puts their face on top of that video. So there's two people involved. But what happens when a third person takes the one video and puts somebody else's face on it? You've got a third person involved. Maybe in that case, both are victims. I'm glad I'm not a lawyer and don't have to figure this stuff out.
Or maybe the technology that allowed it, Why do you give technology that allows
criminal or civil? I guess that's the first question.
Yeah, go for it, Justin. What's the thoughts on this
criminal
one?
or civil issue?
So I think my answer is going to be, what did they do with the deepfake? So if she was able to financially profit off of her, in my experience, when you go to the district attorney, even though you might be able to say she was stealing from me, they're going to say, we go out and get people who are drunk driving, committing rape, causing real harm to people. So my point is, while both of those things, while what you're saying could be both a criminal and civil violation, the reality is that would probably firmly fall within civil. Because I've had cases where one business partner is stealing money from the other, and you go to the DA to prosecute, and he's like, that's what the courts are for. And so when you start getting into technology now, here's another example. What if I want to frame Gabriel because he's my political opponent and put him in some compromising position politically where it goes to his morals? And I create a deep fake video with him and some woman who's not his wife. Am I crossing the line into a criminal act because I am doing something to completely destroy his reputation or cost him an election? Is that getting closer? Or if I fake evidence so that Gabriel's wrongly prosecuted and put in jail, that's probably firmly criminal. So the question becomes, what are you using the deep fake for? What are the consequences of it that might go to whether or not we're attaching civil or criminal consequences? Because I got to be honest, the easiest way to have fixed what happened in 2008, we all remember the Great Recession. All you had to do was perp walk a couple of the CEOs from JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs, and you would have fixed that problem pretty quick, because a fine doesn't solve having your freedom taken away. And obviously that's a bit of an extreme example, but my point is, what are the consequences? What is the use of the deep fake? That's separate and apart from what Artie's talking about, is how do we even regulate the processing of it? Because that's effectively what you're doing with the deep fake. You're using processes to come up with an end product that may have consequences to other people. I've solved nothing, but I tried.
No, but you've made it. I mean, I get the logic being criminal and civil is actually, you've made it fairly simple, to be perfectly honest. I kind of like that, and that's appreciated. The challenge is twofold in my eyes. One, it would almost be a non-issue. Go back to framing your political opponent. It would almost be a non-issue if we could educate people to think before believing. If we could turn around to people, this is why we have Snopes, for crying out loud. Everybody's like, oh, we know the lizard people are taking over. It is what it is. Get over it and get on. But But we have Snopes there for a reason, to try to distinguish the fact that no, they're not nesting under Denver International Airport. And so we have this for a reason, but so many people don't look beyond what their eyes tell them. We haven't gotten to the point in the digital world where people question, they verify before trusting. People still go in and trust off the bat. They trust what the news tells them, they trust what we're telling them, they trust immediately without verifying. So from a human standpoint, I don't know if there's anything we can do, because if I could see pictures of my political opponent doing whatever they want to do in the farmyard, I might go, I know we can do deep fakes. I know that. Maybe I won't actually believe that, at which point the effectiveness of that declines drastically. But we don't even go that
you're
far.
touching on, I'm sorry, Chris, you're touching on something I was hoping we were going to get to, this notion of verifying something. I am concerned that A, people don't know how to do that, but B, even, you and I know how to go verify something, but can we really truly trust our sources anymore? As an example, if the 5 of us got on Google right now and put in the exact same term that we wanted to search, we would get 5 different sets of results.
Right.
That scares me.
Yeah.
So I have another thought here. So I think it's going to be a long time before the general average person learns to verify and validate content or material. I think that's a long shot. But I think what is possible is to have this idea of you said the word trust, and that's what triggered it, to have this idea of a trusted source, right? Some sort of a seal of approval, something that people can rely on. And sometimes we can show as the end user or consumer, we can sway the use of these by sort of voting with our dollars, right? In other words, if we move just like we did for eco-conscious companies, right? It is now smart business to be ecologically conscious, and people are buying more products and supporting in that same way, right? If we can start to build or inculcate a culture of trust and say, hey, I'm only going to buy from or consume from sources that have this sort of certification or trust or something like that, maybe we can make the business interests meet with the personal interest. Because I think there's something in between there, and I'm not sure I'm doing a good job communicating. But did I make any sense?
You are, but here's the problem: how many people are on Facebook? A couple of billion,
yeah.
And yet everybody flocks to it every single day, knowing that they are being abused from a data and a privacy standpoint. How many of you are sitting at home with freaking Google Echoes, Amazons, all the other stupid things, going, hey, really, we choose convenience over safety and security 98 times out of 100?
Until
I mean, it'll take time. It'll take
Yeah.
time, but if I had an option, if there was another, no.
No.
When the grid goes down for a week in Atlanta where I live and there's chaos, when we have a 9/11 cybersecurity event is when things will change. I wish it would be different, but the longer I'm at this and I go speak at conferences where I'm not the security expert and I get on ransomware events where they don't have multi-factor authentication for their remote workforce and we're a year in, that's how I know it will take a 9/11 style cybersecurity event where our grid goes down for us to understand this, because corporations are all about profit and customers.
Yeah.
The only way I think we can handle something of this magnitude is the government with their coercive power probably has to step in. And I know from the free market perspective of people, Facebook's a great example. They don't want regulation. It hurts their business model.
Yeah.
But Trump got taken off Twitter, and look at the boil that's come down a little. I think social media helps our worst impulses because we want to emote. We want to be around people who think like we do. I need to be around more people who don't think like I do so I can appreciate a broader perspective. That's what's being lost in our humanity with all this technology and why we have to think about it differently. And DeepFake, in my view, is moving the goalposts again, and these issues become even more pronounced because we don't verify. We just assume that video must be true. Stick the video in Parler or wherever, and anyway.
Well, it's to Jeff's point. To Jeff's point, all 5 of us will go look at something on Google, and we're all going to be served up something different. And you add the deep fake into that, and now I'm being funneled down a narrower and narrower and narrower funnel until I'm in an echo chamber.
Yep.
I don't want to be in an echo chamber. I want conflicting view. I want somebody to freaking challenge me, preferably with some decent, legitimate information. But we don't.
Well, maybe you're shooting too high, Chris. Maybe we all need to be challenged simply by ideas. I mean, for me, it's all about getting people to think about it. Yeah, I'm not out to change anybody's mind or correct somebody who I think is thinking wrong or has been, deluded by what to our eyes is clearly deep fakes, or what we used to call in the good old days propaganda or misinformation. Baby steps. To me, if we can get people to stop and think, maybe what I'm thinking isn't right, because maybe what I've relied upon in terms of my source information, and nobody's articulating it that way, maybe it wasn't real, or maybe it was not the whole story. However we want to serve it up, get people to think.
But there's segments. Sorry, go ahead, Gabriel.
There's something quick. I think, Jeff, just to what you said, I want to add to that. I think it's sort of like those who adapt survive. I don't know if technology will save us. I think, those in society that will take it home, educate their kids, understand what's going on, and they will be able to protect themselves against, all this misinformation, deep fake. And I don't know if it's something that at a government level, I think, it's a society, like I said at the beginning, I think it's too hard to adapt. And I think only those that will adapt quick enough will be able to, handle this challenge.
I'm on Jeff's side. I'm on Justin's side on this one. And I've said this a number of times in the shit show Thursday nights. Until more people are climbing over dead bodies to get to their keyboards, we're not going to pay attention to this. It'll keep happening until, to Justin's point, to Jeff's point, until the deep fake tells you have to go storm the Capitol again, and we end up with blood on the steps, a lot of it. It's not going to get regulated, and we're not going to do much about it. We don't.
But how can you regulate it? You don't even know who did the deep fake. Deep fake is hard enough to detect, but you don't even know, who put it out there. So, who are you regulating?
Good question. Actually, before we do that, I want to hit a question. Dean hit a really good
question.
Sorry, go for it, Justin.
I put it up on Google and I eliminate Section 230, and I can make Google liable for that content being put up there. You better believe Google's going to police what content gets put up. They just don't like it because now that's a huge regulatory hurdle that impacts their business model. Oh, Gabriel, you can get at that quite easily by making Google and Facebook be legally responsible for the deep fake that gets put out and propagated through their site. End of story. But easier said than done when they deploy their array of lobbyists, which is why the government is going to hammer them most likely with antitrust. And you're going to watch that litigation play out.
That's going to be interesting.
I get worried for my kids over this issue. That's why I feel passionately about it.
No, totally.
Well, this is what I was going to add there. There's parts of our population that are vulnerable, young people and old people. So if not for the average person, it's important to have regulations for those guys.
Totally. Here's a question. Justin, thoughts for you. Dean said this one. Wouldn't this fall under copyright laws? One can't use a photo. Can't and shouldn't are two different things. One can't use a photo or music that's copyrighted without some legal recourse. Do we need to copyright our faces? Can we even do that? Is that something that we can actually do? Is it enforceable? Is it even worth even considering? I'm interested.
Well, I'd have to go back and look at the Copyright Act, but the Copyright Act really goes to protecting the individual creator of something that is unique. And I'm just using logic here, my face or your face or anybody on the call, that is unique to us. As I understand it, our fingerprints are unique to us. So if I'm just thinking through some things logically, I would think there's unique things about every one of us, because none of us looks exactly alike, I guess, except for some twins and things like that, where that might be something that is an opportunity to use copyright law to do that. But the reality is what are the protections you're getting under copyright law? It's really when you kind of combine it with some of the protections under trademark, where you're building a brand. Like if Jeff's brand is his podcast with his face, and that's trademarked, and now I try to go online and deep fake it because I want to get his audience, and I look like Jeff, but it's really Justin, I think Jeff pounds me for trademark infringement, because he's not only copyrighted his face, but he's made his face part of a trademark. When I look at this stuff and you're doing this, I'm starting to think around, how do I use some of the intellectual property laws to help protect me? Because that's really what we're talking about here.
Interesting. I like that. So there's the potential there, which then goes back to the legal recourse side of things. Again, if we can't have the government hammer Google or whomever, then maybe we as individuals, again, that costs money. It's lawyers. It's it's going to get expensive. But if enough people bring lawsuits against, then maybe something happens. I don't know. That's an interesting way of looking at it.
I mean, look at CCPA with the private right of action. If you've noticed, and this is a whole different topic, is I've read some interesting articles about how lobbyists for big tech want to see laws get passed in states that they water down. Then it looks like we're passing regulation because they're stopping on a federal level, but they're watering it down, because what's the one thing a company doesn't want more than anything else? Private right of action.
Right of action.
And this is where the issue's tough, is who benefits from a class action lawsuit? Is it the 5 of us who might have a claim? No, it's pretty much the class action bar. But the other impact of it is that's what get companies' attention to get them to comply, which is your point, Chris. This all sounds great, Justin. How do I give it teeth? That is one way to do it.
Interesting. Interesting. I like that. That was a really good. Thank you. But there we go. Everybody can copy it. Hey, we're running up against the top of the hour. I've just realized. We could keep this going for a hell of a lot longer, but I do want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I'm going to shut up for a second, and I would love last comments and last thoughts for everybody. I apologize. I just suddenly looked at the clock and went, eek. So if you don't mind, last comments, last thoughts from everybody on this one. Again, ladies first, please.
Thank you, Chris. Well, my thoughts in summary are, I think it's important to be responsible when data is created and injected into the data stream, if you will, and for companies that own that data to store it and manage it responsibly. So I'm sort of pushing the cybersecurity point. And after that, I think I'll hand that over to the legal side of things. But from my perspective, that would be sort of on the source of it.
Thank you. Jeff, sir, you're up.
I've appreciated the conversation today, giving me some things to think about, facets of, I learn about deep fakes. I'm like, yeah, blah, blah, blah. I don't really think about it. I don't care about it because I'm older and I don't rely so much on social media. But some of the things that we've touched on today make me think that I need to be a responsible elder statesman and put some more thought into this. So for that, I thank you for being included today.
Thank you, sir. Justin, thank you, sir. Much appreciated. Please, final comments and thoughts.
I'll just say 2 quick things. I think the key parts of what I've learned today is the challenge we have with all this new technology and privacy and security is we worship convenience at the expense of privacy and security. That would be one. And then number 2 is, as we look at new technology like deepfake, drones, pick what you want, what are we learning from our experience with things like social media about what are some of the unintended consequences of this new technology, and learn from that and apply it here?
No, appreciate it. Thank you, sir. Gabrielle, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think we have no choice but to educate ourselves and bring it home and talk to our kids and think about it and understand the risks involved, because we have to adapt. That's my we just have to adapt. We have no choice.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much for everybody for being part of this. Hugely appreciated. Thanks to everybody who's listening. Some fantastic questions. Got to most of them. I've missed a couple. Apologies. Everybody have a safe and healthy time. And again, I think ask more questions, trust a little bit less occasionally. Again, thank you very much, everybody. Take care. Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Bye, everyone.